Class. Hi, it's Dr. Palmer here, and this is lecture 1.2. This is about forms of government, lecture 1.2. What we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be looking at the various forms of government that we have seen in the world today in various places, and as well as throughout history. Some of these forms of government are less prevalent today than they were in the past, and we're going to explain how things have sort of evolved over time a little bit in general in the terms of government. So the first thing we are going to want to look at is some of the vocabulary. If you don't know any of this vocabulary, you really ought to look it up and write it down, okay? So first is autocracy, oligarchy, unitary government, federal government, division of powers, confederation, presidential government, and parliamentary government. Okay. Now, first thing we want to look at are classic forms. What kind of classic forms of government have we seen throughout history? Well, the first is feudalism. And this is the classic form that includes our kings and queens and dukes and duchesses and all of that. And you'll remember that we learned in world history about the certain hierarchy that you go from serfs to vassals and lords and up the chain. You can't really move up the feudal system. You have to be born into it. And privilege is given out based on lines usually along the male heirs would retain rights to land. It was all land-based. And the next one is classical republic. And this is typified by the Greek system, in which you have a small group of elected individuals representing a larger group of citizens. And this sounds a lot like the democracy that we enjoy today, except that there was a lot of the fact that senators had to be of a noble birth, and there was sort of an interchange in there of class and privilege that we wouldn't accept here today. But the Greek city-states were sort of an experiment in this classic republican form. Rome later followed the Greek example, but this sort of died out as we approached the Dark Ages. And in the Dark Ages and in the Middle Ages, we saw quite a lot in Europe of the absolute monarchy. And this is our more typical example where there was one king who ruled all, or queen, rules with absolute authority, over the military and the government. Although to say absolute is a little bit overstating the case. Usually these kings and queens had other forces that were restraining them. And then we have another classic form called authoritarianism. This is basically any form of government in which an individual or a group have unlimited authority. And there's no real effective restraint on that authority. And we see many countries in the third world and in the second world too that have an authoritarian form of government still. Now, your book talks about despotism. And they define despotism as a ruler who rules with their absolute power tyrannically. Tyrannically means sort of, for his own good and nobody else's. Now, the problem I have with this basically is that it's just a question of interpretation. You could have somebody who is ruling with authoritarian power, and if the people like him, like King Stephen from the Disney films Cinderella, if people like him, then he's just an authoritarian good king. But if people don't like him, they'll call him a despot. And it's sort of our belief in the United States that all authoritarianism leads to despotism. But you have to appreciate that some people don't believe that they believe there are good kings or good rulers, and they do choose to allow that to be their form of government. But not in the United States. In the United States, we fight against despotism, certainly, but also even authoritarianism, because we have a liberal democracy. And a liberal democracy's main focus of that form of government is on the individual and individuals' rights. That is the most important thing to consider in a liberal democracy is what are my rights and what can I do to affect my own future through the government. And of course, it's the liberal democracy that was born from what we interpreted as King George III's despotism, as outlined in the Declaration of Independence. And then finally, we have totalitarianism, in which the government is controlling all facets of the citizens' lives. The focus here is not on the individual. The focus is on society. Whereas in the liberal democracy, the focus again was on the individual. In totalitarianism, the society is more important than the individual, and so you have to give up all of your rights. Now, one quick note is that you have to understand that some people choose totalitarianism, and to choose is basically democracy. In democracy, you choose your leaders, but you can also choose the form of government that you have, and some people choose to have totalitarian regimes. And it usually doesn't work out, but you have to appreciate that in some societies and in some countries and some cultures, having a totalitarian regime is more important. An example of this would be China, predominantly. The focus is not on the individual rights, but on society's rights. So here you have it, the classic forms: feudalism, classical republics, absolute monarchies, authoritarianism, despotism, liberal democracies, and totalitarianism. So how do we classify governments? Well, there are three different ways that you can put governments into certain categories. One is the relationship between the lawmakers and those who execute the law. And so what is it that we call the lawmakers again? These are the legislative. And who are the ones who execute the laws? Well, these are the executive. Makes sense? Okay, so that's one way. Another way to classify different forms of government is the geographic distribution of power. Within a given state. So here, for example, in the United States, we have the federal government and we have also the state governments. So some of the power is local and some of it is given up to a larger entity called the federal government. But probably what most people are interested in classifying a government is who can participate in the government. And as we saw here when we were looking at the classic forms here, we understood that a lot of that had to do with, well, are you a king? Can you move up the ladder? Are you a duke? Or just serve or whatever? But this is a critical difference. And the two classic sides of the coin on the issue of who can participate is democracy versus dictatorship. So let's look at the first of these, democracy. In a democracy, the supreme political power and authority rests with who? Well, you guessed it, with the people. It was Abraham Lincoln who described democracy in his Gettysburg Address in 1863 when he said that democracy was government of the people, by the people, and for the people. There are two basic forms of democracy: direct democracy and indirect democracy. In direct democracy, it's the people themselves that make the laws at mass meetings. This is often called pure democracy. But really, who's got time for that in modern society? In fact, there's nowhere in the world that has direct democracy anymore, with the possible exception of the New England small town form of town meetings and some Swiss people. They practice direct democracy. But by and large, we are more familiar with indirect democracy, or what we would call representative democracy, in which the people elect a representative who then in turn makes the laws. Now, the people that are elected in indirect democracy or representative democracy include the president, senators, members of Congress, all the way down to selectmen on your local board for your city or town, or even your trustees for the school board. But all of these people are, the main thing to know is that they are all accountable to the people because of periodic elections mainly, in that the people can decide to not keep that person in power if they don't like the direction that person is going in. And they use various names for this kind of government. Some people call it democracy, a representative democracy. Some people call it Republican forms. But whatever the terms are, the main thing to remember is that it is the people who are who are ruling. It is not politicians. Well, it looks like we're almost out of time on this side. So make sure that you go and check over the into the next video. We're going to be talking more, and we need to talk about dictatorship and the systems of government, presidential and parliamentarian forms of government, and we're about halfway there. See you next time.